Oh,
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 10 of the Tea and Talk podcast. Real yoga, real teachers like us. Me, Crystal Gray, and my co-host, Christy Callahan. How are
hi.
you doing, Christy?
So good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that we got the energy up a little bit before this by talking about farts. So we start. I got a comment from somebody that said something like, something in farts, you're my kind of people. And I was like, yes, then you're my
Yep.
kind of people if that's not
Yep.
scaring you away. Um, it's like that's something that I brought up in one of my yoga classes that I had here at my house recently is just like, we take things so seriously, and a lot of times we're taking our yoga practice so seriously. And I don't mean I take mine very seriously,
Yeah.
but like in a light-hearted kind of way. Like I'm taking the practice of yoga seriously, but not me.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And
Yes.
I think that that's a really
Yeah.
good distinction. And it's like I like to go to classes where I don't feel like I have to wear certain clothes and not sweat and
Yeah.
have like this perfect water bottle or just have all the gear, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
But so anyway, that's us. We're just us. You can take it or leave it. All right. So moving on. In this episode, we're really excited to talk about something that we're both passionate about. But Chris, this is really what Christy is. She's kind of like pioneering it. She's definitely created her business and her Instagram around this topic, and that is size inclusivity in yoga. So before I ask Christy why she thinks that this is so important, I wanted to explain why I think that this is important. So kind of goes back to whenever I remember going to some classes where it was more of like a power style class. And just because these are the classes I was in, and I noticed that a lot of times people would be in those classes, maybe at the back of the room, and whether they were maybe not even in a larger body, but maybe they were not flexible or things like that. And I could just see on their faces that they didn't feel good in their body, that they did not feel good in that class, and that they probably would never come back to that class. And
Yeah.
so or to yoga at all. If you go to like a class and it's your first one and it took everything you had to get
Yeah.
to that class, all of your courage you had to muster up. Maybe it's even been years, that you've been thinking about going to a class. You finally go and then you feel completely disempowered in that class. You might never go back. And that was just always one of my fears. And I'm glad that I went through that experience of noticing that happening in other people's classes, because, and I'm sure I've noticed it in mine too. But what I do in my classes then is when I notice those things, and we'll get into this later, I use my words to kind of motivate people, right, to help with that personal growth and that self-acceptance, so that we can actually move beyond that and continue with the practice.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things in my yoga teacher trainings is that I always want to teach my yoga teacher trainees how to teach classes where no one will ever leave their class thinking, I can't do yoga. I'm
Yeah.
too old, I'm too fat, I'm too out of shape, I'm too inflexible, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
But that's just something that's really important to me. So what
Yeah.
about you, Christy? Why is this such an important topic to you? Oh, and let me just add too, because if they never come back to yoga, then that's an opportunity. I mean, yoga could have completely transformed their life, right?
Yeah.
And they won't ever know. I mean, hopefully they'll find something else, but what
Yeah.
a missed opportunity. So
Right. I can talk for hours about this, so I'm going to keep it really, really concise. Um, so for me, I started my journey as a big person. The first time I ever tried yoga was a video, and it was terrible, and I swore it off. And then I'd lost a bunch of weight, tried yoga again in a much more athletic and fit body, and was obsessed with it and became a teacher and just really embraced it. And then fast forward again 10 years where I got injured gained about 100 pounds rapidly, and now I was lost and had no idea how to do yoga. And so I started going to classes, beginner classes in my town, um, thinking they'll teach me, they'll know what to do with my big body. They'll know how to help me use props because I had no idea. And it was the worst experiences. Every class I went to was really bad. I was usually ignored. I was struggling in my body and just so frustrated, and I hated myself. I hated my body, and all I was doing was just thinking yoga isn't for me anymore. Like this my body, it's just not for big bodies. And um just the lack of understanding and knowledge that the teachers had, and I didn't know at the time because I'm thinking, "What the hell is my problem? I'm just as flexible. I'm just as in shape technically. I hadn't let my fitness level go. Like, why can't I do things anymore? Why can't I get into crow, which is my always my favorite pose? Like, why can't I do this? And why can't I get this bind anymore?" And I just could not understand, and so I kept looking and looking and trying to figure out the answer, and um I never really did until I decided, well, okay, I'm still going to do yoga no matter what. I don't care. I can't let it go after all this time. And so I'm just going to create a pose library. Like that was my plan when I met you. I'm going to create a pose library. Every single pose in the world, I am going to teach a variation of it. I'm going to teach how to do it in a big body. So that's what I had set out to do, make this huge library of poses. And I don't know. I mean, so without going into my entire story, just as I've gotten into this work, um, and what kind of blew the door open for me was, you, Crystal, obviously. When I took one of your training class or one of your yoga classes, which I was scared to take, because here's Crystal, fit, slim body. I know you don't like that word, small body, little person, and doing all these badass poses, and I was afraid, like, oh my god, her classes are going to be so hard, and I just didn't want to put myself through that shame and humiliation that I felt before, even though it was videos. And so one day I tried them, and and I'll just never forget it my whole life. We were sitting in Mauritius Sea, and you just casually said in this general cue, move your belly over your leg to get more room. And it was like, it blew my mind. I'd never heard that before. I had no idea I could do that. It never crossed my mind. Seems like, oh, that would be intuitive. You got a big belly, move it. Like, no, it's not intuitive. It's not intuitive at all for everybody. Maybe some people are like, hey, but they're more empowered in their body than I was. To me, it was like the villain. The body is the villain, and I didn't know. So that changed everything. And so as I started creating my business around teaching yoga teachers how to teach, big bodies, the stories that have come in from other people, the horrible stories that have come in have just blown my mind. I mean, they're not really surprising anymore, but they've just hurt me so much. And so creating this inclusivity and this space where we know how to teach all size bodies has become really, really important to me for the sake of people.
Well, and I think that that would be a good place to start, because if someone's never been in a larger body, and let's just even broaden that to someone who's never been in a body where they feel super uncomfortable, right? Because not
Yeah.
everybody in a larger body is going to feel super uncomfortable. Like
Yeah.
you said, someone like might be like, oh, I just got to move my belly over my leg, whatever, no big deal, right?
Right.
Whereas somebody else, I feel like that's, again, we're getting like so rigid in our practice, and as because that's how a lot of teachers taught, was
Yeah.
that this is exactly how you do it. And it's like, we are trying to change that so that each student feels empowered to make the poses work for them. instead
Yeah.
of forcing their bodies into shapes. And so I think a good thing to share would be some of these stories, some of the stories that maybe you remember because you have so many on your Instagram posts that I've seen, but maybe
Yeah.
even some of your own, like why, because I shared it, I've seen looks on people's faces and things like that, but no one's shared those with me. So what are some things that you remember or that have happened to you as to why this actually is a problem and something that we need to address?
Um, so a lot of the stories that I hear are around students struggling and teachers, like this is the gist. I cannot find stories, but if you go on my Instagram page, anybody that's listening, if you go on there and you read through the comments, you'll be horrified and probably in tears. Some of them are just so awful. A lot of
Yeah.
the stories are around the same idea of teachers allowing people to suffer even when they can't. It's obvious if you're a teacher and you're paying attention to your students, more than likely our faces show the battle inside for the most part, unless you have a poker face. And
Yeah.
and so you'll see the pain and the humiliation, the shame, all the stuff that's kind of going on inside. You may not name it, but you'll see the suffering. And so a
Yeah.
lot of stories of people being ignored, a lot of stories of teachers telling them, you need to force it. That was one of my stories as well. A local teacher here, I had posted, saying I had this experience. I went into a beginner class at this big popular gym here where all like the cool popular yoga teachers taught, and it's a like it's a gym, but it's like kind of a bougie kind of gym. And so
Yeah.
the yoga teachers that are there are just really well known in the area. And I had gone in and I took this beginner class, and the teacher spoke in Sanskrit, taught every pose in Sanskrit. And I was lost, and the poses were so hard. There was ne'er a prop to be seen. And four people walked out of her class. Four freaking people. And it was shocking to me, to be honest. Like four people have all separate, like they weren't all together, like one at a time. They got up and left this class. And so I
Wow.
posted about this experience on my Facebook, and I was friends with a lot of local yoga teachers and studio owners. And this one guy who was an Ashtanga teacher, just saying, but he basically told me that, because I said, I just was explaining this was my frustration. So he messages
Yeah.
me and he's like, well, what poses do you want help modifying? I was like, well, I'm not asking for pose pose modifications. I'm explaining this experience. And he's basically shamed me and said, um, I don't want to give you modifications because you need to, he literally said, you need to suffer to get into the pose. You need to force your body into these poses. And by me providing you a modification, I'm giving you an easy way out. And I, you know, when you're in a larger body, a lot of times you don't just know that it's just your body and that's okay. It's like, this is the enemy. This is my body. It's fat and it's disgusting and I hate it. And I feel ashamed because, that's just kind of like a social influence. And so I owned that. Like, yeah, he's right. I suck and I need to suck it up. And um, so that was a really, really hard experience. And these are the stories that I hear over and over and over again. Teachers shaming their students, not intentionally. It's never
Yeah.
intentional. Well, I would like to think it's never intentional. It's never
Right.
like you're fat, lose weight. It's never those types of things. It's like, like I found that losing weight really helped change my practice. It's shit like that, and it's on repeat and it's constant. And when I talk to a lot of yoga teachers, they'll tell me, well, nobody's ever complained, so it must be fine. And it's like,
Right.
I would tell yoga teachers in the class, because I could recognize as a teacher, this was a beautiful class, and not recognize, because still the blame was all on me. Like, I suck, so it never was connecting that if the class was difficult for me, that the teacher could have helped. No, it was because I suck, my body sucks. And so I would never tell the teacher
Mhm.
because it's two different things. So I would go in my car and cry after every class, just hating myself. Meanwhile, the teacher got a compliment from me. And so they're thinking everything's great. And it's like, well,
Right.
no, you know,
Because as students, we think it must be us.
right.
A
Yeah.
lot of times it's our issue, not the teachers, right? And something that I always tell my student or my yoga teacher trainees is that, like you said, we have to be watching our students. And I think, like in the beginning, whenever I first started teaching, and I think, again, this is like those styles of yoga that are more rigid, which honestly is a lot. And like Ashtanga is more rigid for sure.
Yeah.
Iyengar, not saying that they're bad. I think they also serve their purpose, but it's just not every type of yoga is for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Um, but really being able to watch your students and to know when people are struggling with things, how can you make it better as a teacher? Like
Yeah.
if you say a cue and a lot of people do it wrong, I think it's easy for teachers to be like, fucking noobs, they don't know what they're
Yep.
doing, they'll get it,
Idiots.
maybe they'll get it one day,
Yeah.
but instead it's like, or maybe they just don't, they might not even care, they're like, whatever, they're not going to get hurt, it doesn't matter. Or they
Yeah.
might not really know alignment that well, not all
Right.
teachers really know alignment that well, but it's up to us to take that responsibility on us and change our cues, change our language,
Yeah.
which is something I'm working on, is how to be more invitational in my language and doing different things like that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know, like, what does it mean to you to say I have, like, I teach in a size inclusive way, or my classes are size inclusive? Like, what does that mean?
I to me it means, I'm a fan of integration. I'm not a fan of segregating classes. You can, if you got like if I wanted to teach a group of bigger bodies because
Yeah.
we all are, understanding of each other, then I think
Right.
that's fine. But I like integration because why, we need to be able to learn how to teach all size bodies. I'm not saying everybody. I know that's a separate movement of accessibility that you should be able to teach every
Right.
human that comes into your room.
Right.
No, you need to
Right.
teach every
In
size.
one class, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's unreasonable in my opinion. And your teaching is going to get really watered down, but that's a whole other thing. But to teach every size body means, to me, like you said, invitational language is really important. And then it's giving the students back, like pushing back their putting their autonomy back on them, reminding them that they have agency, which just means the ability to make decisions for themselves. Reminding them and
Yes.
empowering them in these things that they can make the pose their own. We're there as teachers to kind of guide that process, and kind of mentor from afar.
Yes.
Um, but it's from afar unless a student approaches us. I don't think we should ever be calling out like, "Hey, if you got a big belly, move it." I mean, I guess you could, but we don't want to be like calling anybody out specifically or walking over to somebody being like, "Hey, I noticed your fat's in the way." I mean, we really want to kind of avoid that type of scenario.
Right.
So we want to be inclusive. For me, it's like I teach to cue the most accessible variation of a pose. And this is such a large topic, so I have to settle down because I I try to think of what is important to explain right now and what isn't.
Well, because
Uh
we're doing a whole workshop on this at our little learning
yeah,
retreat, so it's a huge topic.
it is a big topic. And it's very nuanced. It's not complex,
Right.
but it is nuanced. There's a lot of like little areas, because
Right.
then we have to get into the difference of what is the difference between accessibility and inclusivity. Accessibility, like with the big bodies, just to make it simple, the big bodies, we're just trying to level the playing field. So we'll use
Right.
child's pose as an example. So knees together, um, that is not an accessible pose for a big body. It's not accessible to a lot of bodies because if you've got a big belly and you're
Hmm.
trying to curl up, it's just really hard and frustrating. So, like you teach, knees wide, toes together, wiggle that belly in that open space so you have the ability to expand and breathe.
Yeah.
Breathing is so important.
Yeah.
The ability to have breath in our lungs is important. And so that is your most inclusive, accessible option for the appropriate setting in this class where we're getting
Right.
ground. Uh,
Exactly.
and then
But
you
then
can,
we're always building up from there, right? So
yeah,
we're never, and we've said this in the podcast before, but we're never going to say, if you can't do this, or if, whatever, then let's
yeah,
go back to here. Or if you need a
yeah,
prop, then you can grab it, So we're always starting at the
yes,
most accessible version that class needs, like you
right,
said. So, and that honestly just takes time to, like, as a
yes,
teacher, it's pretty easy for me to look at bodies like in Sukhasana at the beginning, in child's pose, in their first down dog. If we're doing a down dog that day, I can see, okay, I'm going to need to start at this place, or
yeah,
okay, I'm going to need to start at this place.
yeah,
And that's just something that you get better at with time. And I think it's better to err on the side of going too easy,
mm-hmm,
because most teachers teach way too hard. I've
right,
never really seen a teacher that teaches too easy.
yeah, no, no,
Maybe me, but I don't think it's too easy. I think it's appropriately easy,
right,
right? Because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't even really matter the body size.
yeah,
That really, it doesn't matter. I mean, someone who's bigger can be way more flexible, way stronger than someone who's in a smaller body.
yeah,
So we can't assume. And I think that that's another part of it. Because, like you've said before, whenever, I mean, I do feel like I have to move my belly over my leg, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, really? I'm like, yeah, we can't
yeah,
assume just because someone's in this type of body that
yeah.
anything.
There was somebody commented on my post not too long ago and said she's in a small body, but she used to be in a larger body and she lost a lot of weight. So she had a lot of skin that was neatly tucked inside her yoga pants and her clothes.
Right.
So she was viewed as somebody in a small body. Nobody would have thought any thought anything of it, but
Christy's
nobody,
cat's in the way for all of you that are listening to
yeah,
this, and
sorry.
she's getting frustrated.
It's a constant battle. She was, she didn't realize until she saw one of my posts about moving the belly that there was anything she can do. And so we can't look at a room. We can't say like, oh, a fat student's in here. I better cue for a fat body.
Exactly.
'Cause she was
Exactly.
left out all this time and was just like, oh, I can do something different. Nobody ever told her. Nobody ever tells you
Right.
anyway. That is not a normal thing to go into a class and have somebody tell you to move your belly. Like it's just not.
Right. Yeah. And
But
that was just an intuitive thing that did happen to me, because I started to notice that. I'm like, oh, well, if I have to do that, then I
yeah,
bet other people are too.
right.
Um, and by becoming a more size inclusive teacher, just like we're saying, you can't generalize, it's going to help your teaching in
Yeah.
every way, because you'll just
Yes.
become a more accessible yoga teacher by kind of default.
Yeah. Yeah. Because these aren't these, like you said, it's not like just this thing we know. I mean, yoga teachers aren't always in touch with their body either.
Right.
And I think one thing to me that's really important is avoiding the pejorative tone, the pejorative languaging, like if you can't do this,
Exactly.
a block. So we want to start with the accessible, which to me, accessible isn't easy. It's leveling out the fat playing field,
Right.
and it because I was the fat, strong, flexible person before I got injured or whatever you want to call
Yeah.
this illness. And and so people would expect nothing of me. And,
Yeah.
but I wasn't special. I was just a normal person in a big butt, not a normal, I don't know if you want to say that, but so what I teach is like teach the most accessible variation and then cue for increased flexibility, difficulty, challenge, whatever. But like the common way of cueing is you cue like the most traditional pose, and then I call it queuing up and queuing down. You queue up to like full expression, which is a term, but and then you queue down and we modify to make it work
Right.
for those that can't, you know.
Right.
And so like this is a method I think we need to completely do away with. Teach an accessible variation so everybody is included from the beginning and doesn't have to sit there feeling like
Exactly.
shit, you know.
Exactly. And then if you need, how I say it is if you need more sensation. And then
Mhm.
also you have to explain what that means because the ego
Yes.
is going to have one idea of what that means versus your, like your body, right? So
Yeah.
what, well, yeah. And I just try to explain that in every single class and kind of have them think about it. And that's something that also takes time. Okay, well, what's my ego and what's my body? And I tried another way
Right.
I explain it is what's going to bring you into balance today?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
In the splits, you're going to be sore as hell tomorrow. You
Yeah.
know, so what's going to bring you into balance? You want to feel better after this class than worse. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
okay to have some soreness. I get sore
Yeah.
still from my yoga practice, but not to the point where like I can't walk and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, so we asked around in social media, and you can share. I'm not going to like actually read any specific posts, but we asked in my Facebook group, the Yoga and Mindfulness Community, how they make their classes more size inclusive. And there was a lot of great answers. One of the ones I kept hearing, there weren't tons of answers.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to show that lots of people don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that people are kind of nervous and scared to even maybe say it because it's
Yeah.
also to a lot of people kind of taboo. We
Yeah.
talk about it a lot, so it's not. But you have to talk about these things that are hard to talk about
Yeah.
in order to feel comfortable talking about them, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have this podcast.
Yeah.
But we asked, and one of the things that stuck out to me is that we saw a lot of people saying props.
Hmm.
And while I think that, yes, props can be an added benefit, but to support people in larger bodies, but it's not the end all be all because we should be using props for every single body, not just those in larger bodies. So I
Yes.
get what they were trying to say. And I think that it's not a bad answer, but let's broaden that because we
Yeah.
should be using props for everyone.
Right. Yeah. Props aren't for fat, weak people. That's
Right.
not what a prop is, you know. And yeah, I saw that a lot of answers around props. My page had some different answers. I mean, because obviously the people that are following me are in that mindset
Right.
already.
Right.
Um, and so a lot of the responses I noticed were I slowed down, which I thought was such a beautiful answer because that isn't necessarily just addressing big bodies, which big bodies don't necessarily need you to slow down,
Right.
but it creates a space where you have time to move through things, no matter what your size is, but
Right.
and you're not rushing to just force a pose
Right.
shape, you know, and
Yeah.
that in and of
And it
itself.
helps you to feel it, which is what we
Yes.
want all of our students to do is
Right.
feel how the pose feels in their body. And if you're rushing through so fast, you don't have the time to do that.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, that's why I kind of have started to veer away. I mean, I don't really teach vinyasas anymore because I'm in a wheelchair and it just doesn't feel authentic to me right now. But I've started to kind of veer away from like sun salutations because if you're moving with the breath, it's a beautiful practice. But for me, it's completely inaccessible um, because I can't move quick enough to breathe appropriately.
Right.
So
Right.
that is so inaccessible to me. It's fine in like a vinyasa style class, obviously, but it's just, you know, just the timing, like keeping, like even in restorative yoga, a lot of times it'll be like, here's the setup, now get in it. And by the time somebody has made it comfortable for their body, we're 3 minutes into the pose, which is only, 5 minutes. And so you've got 2 minutes left. It's
Right.
like time is such a beautiful thing. And we have it. Who cares if we get 30 poses in? Let's get, let's get 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever poses in
Totally.
and have a good, satisfying and nurturing practice instead of a,
Yes.
you know, complicated one.
Well, and one that's I find usually is more likely to bring our nervous systems into balance, which is
Yeah.
such a huge part of my teaching at this
Yeah.
point. Were there any other comments that you remember that kind of stuck out for you?
Let me take a quick peek because that one is right there. Because there were
Yeah,
some good answers.
yeah, and like I said, the props one isn't wrong, and I'm actually really glad to see that a lot of people are using props and suggesting to use them. So just while Christy's looking, how I work with props and how I teach with them is to I usually start everybody on that prop. Again, it's going to
Yeah.
depend on the style, the class
Yeah.
description, whatever, but in general, I'm going to start everybody if I feel like more like people need to like at least if I feel like probably even one person needs to sit on a bolster in class, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have everybody start on that bolster because
Yeah.
it's also not going to hurt anything to have
Right.
somebody sit on a bolster for sukhasana as opposed to the floor,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you can have them feel like why they're sitting there, how it feels different from maybe sitting on the floor. I always like to show what not to do. So this is what happens to most of us if we don't sit on a bolster. And that's
Yeah.
for everybody, not
Yeah.
just again, not just people in a larger body, because most people need to sit up on a bolster.
Yeah.
I'd say like 75% of people that come to my classes for sure, which is
Yeah.
a high
Full of
number.
benefits. Yeah. It's very beneficial, and why are we shying away from that? Um, so let's see. Um, a lot of people talk about like, again, that invitational language. This is not like
Yeah.
veering away from the word modification, which I know you and I differ on this a little bit, but the way I view modification, the term modifying is like it creates a little bit of a hierarchy, which is what full expression as well does, that hierarchy of poses.
I
So
think it does for most for if you use it in the traditional sense.
yes. Yeah. I mean,
I'm
and you
interjecting.
say, huh?
I said I'm just interjecting here. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and a lot of people still use it. And it's honestly, I have to fight myself to not use it because that's been part of my languaging for so long. And it's just, whether it is grammatically accurate or if it's grammatically actually creating a hierarchy or if it's a feeling that it creates the hierarchy.
I think it's how the teachers use it.
Yeah.
If it's too hard for you, you can modify and do this.
Right.
That's why it's like, I don't feel like that word's going away. So instead, I want to kind of turn it into an empowering word that says, yeah, you modify it, but you're modifying actually every single pose.
Yeah.
Everybody is doing that.
Yes.
Even if I can make my body look exactly like something from a book, I'm still modifying it to
Yeah.
fit my body,
Right. Yeah.
to work for me. And everybody, I think we're doing that whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
And that's just that's my take on it. Cause I think and I haven't said that out loud before, it just made me think about it because let's take it and make it an empowering thing instead of a disempowering thing so that if people go to other classes maybe and hear that word, they're not
Yeah.
like, well, fuck, I have to modify because blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They're like, oh, yeah, well, I modify every pose. I mean, in an ideal world, that's what we would want people to think. Because whenever
Yeah.
I think of variation, it's kind of like, okay, if we're in, say, side angle stretch, uh, a variation could be a bind
Yeah.
or a variation in pyramid could be with a prayer behind your back. That's just how I use it. And that, I mean, all of us teachers, we teach in a little different way and use words a little bit differently. And I think it's just important to let your students know what you mean, maybe when you
Yeah.
say things, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know if you've noticed, but one of the things that differs around here is like if you go to a power yoga class or a hot class, they're going to say Tadasana is with the arms by your sides.
Yeah.
And that's like a core power thing, right? I don't really know why core, I'm sure there's some reason for it, but to
Yeah.
me it's like so frustrating. It's like just fucking call it what everybody else calls it. You know, mountain is arms by the sides, not up overhead. So sorry, core power calls it arms up overhead. This is mountain.
Oh,
So if they say
interesting.
mountain, then I'm always like, oh, okay. Then I'm like doing mountain, and then everybody else is doing Urdhva Hastasana.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I've never seen that. Never been to Core Powers. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That,
so I guess that does look like a mountain, but that's not the traditional name of the pose. But who knows? Maybe in some lineages in India that it totally could be. I don't know.
yeah.
But if I like, I used to teach at this studio where it was more, there was a lot of power yoga there and hot yoga and stuff. And so that was like the culture of that studio. That was their mountain was opposite of mine. So I just let them
Yeah.
know. I was
Right.
like, this is what I call it. I didn't say that was wrong because it's not wrong. It's just
Yeah.
different.
Right.
Um, so yeah, then people understand instead of it confusing the fuck out of everybody, just explain
Right. Yeah.
it.
That's a good point. It's not the terms necessarily themselves, it's how you use it. I mean, I would still always stay away from full expression unless I
Oh
was
yeah.
saying, find your
Your exact.
fullest expression today on
Yes,
this
right
night.
now,
Yeah.
in this second.
Yeah.
Exactly, me too.
Yeah, because I mean, as a student, as a competitive type of student, my mindset is, I mean, not so much now, but my mind before was like, whatever the hardest thing is, I need to do that.
Right.
Whatever you say is a full expression, like dancer,
Yeah.
if I don't get my foot to touch my head with my arms coming up over my head, then I
Mhm.
have failed and I will
Yes.
never know I will never get this pose right.
Yes.
And a lot of people think that way. And that's something we want to invite them to release. Like I
Yes.
use variation, option, edit. I say edit the pose,
I
find
like that.
your pose. So
Yeah.
just it's not the words necessarily. It's the intent, but it's not your intent, it's your given intent. Like what space are you creating?
Right.
It doesn't matter what you feel in your heart if you're not putting that, my cat, if you're not putting that across to your students, they're not going to understand what's in your heart and your mind. You're like, oh,
Right.
well, that's what I meant. Well, it's like, well, that doesn't matter. It's what
Right.
you said or what you demonstrated that
Right.
matters.
Yeah, and this goes again for all students, not just students in larger bodies, but as a
Yeah.
teacher, I don't do the hardest variation. Sometimes I will. It's like I do the hardest variation I can do if it's very select students who I
Yeah.
know and who
Yes.
already know, like they just know. They know
Right.
that by doing that, it's not going to make them shitty or better or anything like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
usually, until you really know your students know that,
Yeah.
then I'm always doing the variation, the most accessible variation that class needs. I'm going to
Right.
be doing that one. So even like in monkey, I can do monkey with my palms flat on the ground,
Yeah.
right? But I'm not going to be doing that in
Yeah.
that style, that level of class. I'm going to be bringing my hands to my shins.
Right. Yeah,
So,
and I think that's a good point because I think a really important aspect sometimes for us as yoga teachers is feeling like we need to be doing the most advanced variation of a pose or what the hell, I mean, that's for, many years of my teaching,
oh
for sure
yeah,
for the first like 6 or 8 years to me, it was all about my practice, all about me being a badass. And I loved people being like, oh, I wish I was as strong as you. Oh, I wish I was as flexible as you. It was like, yep. And then I'd act all humble, like, it's just ligament length, whatever. But like in my heart, I'm like, yeah,
Right.
and it's like I'm so embarrassed about it. I'm so sad about that because I think now how many students did I make feel ashamed or humiliated or feel like they were less than because of how I approached it, and as a teacher, I think it's important to remember it's not about us. It's not our time to shine. It's their time to shine, their time to feel really good in their bodies. And you go home and you do the practice however you want later.
Right. Exactly.
It's hard. It's a hard subject. It is very taboo. It shouldn't be. That's another thing I talk about is say the body parts without shame.
Right. Right.
If you're afraid to say move your tummy, move your belly, if you're afraid to say those words, then we're just adding to that narrative that fat is bad and big is bad and bellies are bad.
Right.
Let's have more relaxed language around that to make it feel not so ashamed. And every teacher, this is another thing you can look through on the comments. You'll learn a lot in the comments on my page, my Instagram page, because people share so much. A lot of teachers share that, and then teachers, they're scared, and I get it. They're afraid to say it because they don't want a bigger body to be like, ugh, okay, like whatever, or who is she or whatever, or be offended or triggered or whatever. But a lot of them say, like, the first time they say move your belly, because my term is lift and shift your squishy bits, move
Yeah.
stuff around. And when they use those terms in class for the first time, the response is always exactly the same: giggling, and the atmosphere all of a sudden changes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what a beautiful thing, like somebody could literally find safety in their own body for the very first time in your class. And that was what happened with you. I found that started the transformation of this is friend, not foe. And
Yeah.
just that one tiny little comment, one tiny little cue changed the whole trajectory of my life, the way I thought about myself, my teaching, everything. Everything. That's incredible. That's a lot of power that we have as teachers.
Yeah. And I
Good.
think we met at the exact right time. I think it's easy to get mad at yourself for not creating certain spaces when you were a newer teacher, and even 8 years in or whatever, right? Like there's always more for us to learn, especially if you start teaching in different settings or to like different people. Because teaching in a fitness place or a power yoga place is going to be a lot different than teaching at other places, right?
Yeah.
But it's all part of the journey.
Yeah.
And as yoga teachers, if we're doing the work, I mean, hopefully we can get more enlightened and become more aware. And I think that instead of being mad at ourselves for how we used to teach or whatever, it's like, oh, I'm so glad that I recognize that now.
Yeah.
And that I don't like to say grown beyond that or whatever, because that creates like a hierarchy kind of thing too, but just that you have a broader awareness
Yeah.
and a more awareness of other people's experiences in their bodies. And not only again with the size, but I think with aging,
Hmm.
I think as my body gets older, I'm only going to get better and I'm going to be more age inclusive
Yeah.
because I know what it feels like to be achy, to be tight. Like there's
Yeah.
poses now that I'm like, I wonder why I can't do that. Like,
Yeah.
skandasana, like the lunge to the side,
Yeah.
how one leg's out. Like I used to be able to go
Yeah.
all the way down on my heel, lean in front, go around and bind.
Yeah.
And I can't do it with my heel down. And I don't know. It's like that's something with aging that it's like if you don't practice those things, I'm sure if I practiced it a lot, I can get it.
Yeah.
But I used to be able to just fucking do it. I
Yeah.
used to be able to just do a drop back. I used to
Yes.
just be able to do this like crazy, funky crow pose with like one forearm down and my knee on my elbow. And I was thinking
Yeah.
about doing that the other morning in my practice. And I'm like, maybe I'll
No.
wait to try that until I've been more consistent with my physical practice. because I feel like I'm kind of ramping it up again. But it's like, I know that and I know my limits now. And it didn't
Yeah.
make me feel like a loser the rest of the day. I'm like, whatever.
Right.
Like, would I want to
Yeah.
go back to the mind and the soul and the heart, not soul, but my mind and heart and awareness that I
Yeah.
had 10 years ago,
Right.
even though I was more flexible and stronger? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always say in my classes, just because, once you go all the way down in the splits, is not going to make you more enlightened.
Right. Yeah.
So, I was like, trust me, otherwise I'd be enlightened and I'm not,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Well, in your training, we were working on crow at one point, and I was trying to get my crow back, and I was struggling, really struggling with it. But I was struggling to compare, not comparing myself, because when I was in my prime in my 30s, I learned how to do the like crow to headstand, back to crow,
yeah,
or letting your legs fall out of that headstand into chaturanga.
yeah,
Like, I was obsessed with these transitions,
yeah,
and now all of a sudden I couldn't get myself into crow, and the shame that I was feeling on myself, and embarrassment and humiliation. It's like, because the practice was all about the shape and the strength,
yeah,
and that's fine. That's what pulled me in,
right.
great. It's beautiful. But like, we have to be able to allow our bodies to change and grow, and to know, like you said, I remember when you told me that for the first time, that like doing gymnastics or whatever, like, poses don't make you more enlightened. And I guess I never thought about it in that way. I never heard that.
Yeah,
But when you said that, was like, "What do you mean?" You know? You know that little meme or whatever, little video clip of, Jennifer Lawrence going, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And she's, like, crying. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but that's what I always think of, like, "But what do you mean?" "I won't be more enlightened? I don't understand," you know?
right.
Just changes
And
thing.
yeah, or even saying you're not better at yoga because you can go all the way
Yes.
down to the splits. It's like,
Right.
people that let's as a yoga teacher, let's all collectively change this.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this before in my yoga teacher training recently. I had a few people say different things, and even in my group coaching and the 300 and whatever, I'll have teachers say things that they know, like, consciously that they shouldn't say, but
Yeah.
like subconsciously they believe it, and they'll be like, I know
Right.
that's not what I mean. I'm like, well, then don't say it.
Yes.
Know that it's not true, then don't say it, because we're perpetuating
Yeah.
this myth and it's hurting yoga and it's keeping a whole bunch of
Yeah.
people away from it. And it's like, okay, so talking about aging and stuff, or even gaining weight, right? Like, you had a different body before, then you came back to yoga or continued doing yoga and you had a different body. And it's like, we don't just give up on the practice or stop doing the practice because our bodies change and we
Yeah.
can't do the poses how we once did. And this is again why I say I'm so adamant now about saying we do yoga to bring ourselves back into balance. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what's the fucking point? I mean,
Right.
yes, it can be a physical exercise. Yes, it can be this. Yes, it can be that. But that's not why we do it. If we
Right.
do it to bring ourselves back into balance, then I think that the practice is going to serve us more, and we will have more self-acceptance for our bodies
Yeah.
wherever they're at, right?
Yeah, it's very powerful. The
Yeah,
whole practice of yoga is really powerful to help you to create a safe, um space for yourself, that your body is safe and that your body is your friend and not, this hated enemy. And like, that yoga is unique in that way. I mean, you can go to the gym and do all that stuff, and that is all really, really good,
yeah,
but it doesn't necessarily have, it can, I guess, doesn't have the same effect necessarily. I mean, the whole word yoga itself, yoking, body, mind, and spirit. But that's not just like stupid ass languaging. Like, that is
right.
a real idea. It is a real thing that can change your life if you
Right.
allow it to.
Yeah. And I think a good note to the last thing I'll say, and then you can share whatever you'd like, is that for any student, if you are one of those people that is constantly thinking about what your body can't do, to at the end of your practice, or even if you're not doing yoga that day, but at the end of the day, think about all of the things your body did for you.
Yeah.
Because I think that that can really shift. Well, I know it can really shift your perspective, but also your relationship with your body and
Yes.
shift your focus,
Yeah.
So that's my last words of wisdom. What about you?
Well, just to say more, I'm gonna say more stuff about that because I think that is probably one of the most powerful transformations personally for me
Yeah.
as somebody that really truly used to hate myself, hate my body. I used to punch myself in the stomach. I just hated myself. And like when I started to understand how incredible my body was, even in its dysfunction, even in my wheelchair situation and its, a dysfunction, my body is still working 24/7 to keep me safe and to protect me. And this is incredible. We may not like
Yeah.
how it's doing it, but this is incredible. And what a beautiful thing that we inhabit this vessel that is constantly trying to keep us okay, but we
Right.
hate it and
Right.
we punish it. And when you start to like see it that way, you're like, it's like, holy shit, it
Yeah.
doesn't look how I want it to. It doesn't necessarily function the way I want it to, but gosh damn it, keeps me alive. It heals my skin, it heals cuts, it heals
Yeah.
internal things when I give it what it needs. Like it's just incredible. And that in and of itself can really start to
Yeah.
transform your mindset.
Well, because our bodies aren't the enemy. And I think it's
Yeah.
the closest thing to us, and it's easy to blame, but it's like there's environmental factors, there's
Yeah.
physiological factors, there's so mental, emotional, there's so many factors. Our body's doing the best it can,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're right. It can completely change your life. And that's something that yoga really helped me with, was to start noticing how strong my body was, and also how to bring my body back into balance. Like,
Yeah.
well, if I, drink a shit ton of coffee, how's that going to make me feel before my practice? Or
Yeah.
if I do this or that. So just, yeah, starting to be more aware and in tune to what your body needs, both on and off the mat. So, all
Yeah.
right, Christy. So where can people find out more about you and connect with you?
The easiest place is my Instagram, which is size inclusive yoga. And I have a lot of stuff on there, a lot of free like education. Just my page is full of it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you can message me, and that's the easiest place to reach me.
Awesome. Thank you. And then, as most of you know, if you've been listening, I have another round of my 300-hour coming up, regardless of when you're listening to this, because I will be having more. But make sure you go to crystalgrayyoga.com. And then if you're on your phone, you'll click on the little hamburgers, what you call it, the 3 lines or whatever. Click on that and it'll say 300 or 500-hour. So click on that. And you can just get on the info list to get more information. Like Christy says, I mean, she got a lot out of my program. I got so much out of having her in my program. And something I love about my programs is that and I think the reason why both of us got so much out of it and why everybody does is that it's a level playing field. And
Yeah.
I really try to bring in everybody's experience and learn from each other, not just me on this whatever, like this is how everything is and
Yeah.
let's just do it exactly how I say, but let's all learn and grow together and build that community. So again, it's
Yeah.
crystalgrayyoga.com. Have an amazing week, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Bye.